2,500 years ago, a Greek scribe wrote out a dazzling list of wonders. Sights seen in the mind's eye, he said, can never be destroyed. To this day, that magic list still haunts the modern world. So powerful is the ancient dream that the classic list of 7 wonders still encourages competition, and brand new lists of wonders too. In opinion polls, the Sydney Opera House is regularly rated as the single greatest wonder of the modern world.
You find that these modern lists of wonders are a real odd lot. They're not the biggest or the fastest or anything you might expect. They're really things like opera houses that are too small for grand opera, or very old high-rises that King Kong once fell off of, or the footprints of the first men on the moon. Strange things. Dams, bridges, rusty now, most of them, obsolete airplanes, Disneyland, Vegas, things that people want to see before they die. Things that fill them with wonder. So what is wonderful? Well, our ideas of wonderful are the same as those defined by the ancient Greeks 2,500 years ago. They're things that seem filled with the idea of human imagination, of ambition and achievement. They're part of the new religion which fuels the modern world just as it fueled the ancient Greeks. And so, you know, the story of the history of wonder, the story of how those ancient images of it went from Greece right up until today, are really the story of the modern imagination. And it's the most extraordinary tale.
Climbing up inside the Opera House is a bit like climbing up inside the pyramids. You travel through the scenery of the human imagination, back to the most ancient ghosts of wonder. This wonder was born in the mind of a Danish architect, Jørn Utzon. It took 3 years of computer processing to calculate the curves that he had quickly sketched upon a pad. Titanium and resin hold it all together. Loose drawings made concrete with 60s high tech. Like the ancient Greeks, though, Utzon was still in the business of making beautiful, wonderful shapes.
Nowadays, though, the very nature of wonder is changing. It's not the hardware anymore, it's not the buildings, it's the software that designs them. It's not great statues anymore, it's the pill. It's the telephone, the thing that joins all the buildings in the world, not just one building. It's process. And that, you know, in a strange way takes us right back to the beginnings of modern civilization. back to the beginnings of wonder at the pyramids of Egypt.
Process is what you're looking at here. The Egyptian pyramids are not just amazing monuments, but the residue of a process that impoverished an entire nation. Thousands upon thousands of people labouring for decade after decade. They made the sole surviving ancient wonder, the oldest too. Of all the ancient wonders, the pyramids are the only one on everybody's all-time list of wonders. This, then, is where it all started, this long journey of the human imagination that reaches till today. In the first century, Pliny, that most sensible Roman, called the pyramids idle and foolish exhibitions of royal wealth. By that time, they were already some 2,500 years old, and their true purposes had been lost. Clearly, the pyramids are the tombs of kings, but they're also something else as well. To the ancient Egyptians, they stood as friends. For as they built the pyramids, the Egyptians had invented the notion of the sacred state. The pyramids, therefore, were proof that their kingdom was in order and joined on to eternity. Just as we do today, the ancient Egyptians of later ages came to stand in the sand and marvel at the pyramids. What, then, were the processes by which these two things were made? The pyramids and the state together.
The first thing you did when you started to build a pyramid was to dig a hole for the royal burial chamber. Egyptian kings had always been buried in the ground. They were very traditional people. Actually, for its time, this burial chamber is rather old-fashioned. But it's the size here that impresses you. If this had ever been finished, it would have been the biggest tomb ever made inside a pyramid.
This hole for the burial chamber had to be in good strong stone on a ridge overlooking the Nile, close to the royal city of Memphis. Here, then, you can see how a pyramid was built, because this one was never finished. The king, Djedefre, only lived for a few years between the builders of the two great pyramids, Cheops and Khephren. This is an unfinished pyramid from the era of the greatest pyramids of them all.
When they'd finished making the hole for the burial chamber, the pyramid makers then mobilised the entire available population of Egypt to move blocks the size of this one up to the pyramid. But how on earth did these ancient people move these huge stones? Well, for 3,000 years, nobody asked the question, because the ancient Egyptians were happily trundling these big blocks around. Everybody knew how it was done. But then they went and the Christians came, and they thought the ancient stones had been moved by the power of God. They thought that if you got a little piece of papyrus and wrote a prayer on it, stuffed it under the stones, that you could shoot an arrow and the power of the prayer would send the stone up to the pyramid plateau behind the arrow. Medieval times, rabbis taught that Moses had done it with the slave gangs of ancient Israel. In the 19th century, British archaeologists, who after all were working in a colonial situation, saw that it was done by millions of coolies with firm governance, just like the British had provided. Today, of course, we've got a lot of ecologically ingenious situations with, bearded professors who come along with bits of wood and suggest that if you wet this and dry that out, it all zooms up in the air. In fact, the truth is a lot simpler. A few years ago, there was a congress of retired archaeologists in a village in France. And these elderly gentlemen, without too much physical effort, pushed huge blocks of stone down the high street in a test using mud and water. These blocks move like they're on ice if you get it going right. And these people were very skillful. These were the guys that had just made the Great Pyramid itself. It was a very simple technology and very complex organisation. The absolute reverse of the modern world. That's why we find it so mysterious.
The pyramids of this first great age of pyramid building are not just the first large stone structures in the world, not just the largest either, but also the most accurate. Egyptian pyramids are far more than just a nation shoving around blocks of stone. They are set precisely on the points of the compass. Their corners are near perfect right angles, and the length of their four sides is virtually the same. With dimensions of 600 and 700 feet and more, the maximum error in them is a matter of a few inches.
How on earth did they do it then? Well, the answer is simplicity, subtlety, and tremendous determination, year after year. As for some clues to their methods, well, you can find them if you look. That's the north-south line there. They used the movements of the stars to find the 4 points of the compass. And to keep the base stones, the whole foundations, absolutely level, they made a little channel right round the edge of the pyramid filled with water. And for all the angles, the right angles along here, and the points that went right up to the very top, they stretched strings everywhere. The Egyptians loved geometry. Their buildings are filled with the most subtle and complex geometrical calculations. 2,000 years later, Philo-Byzantium, the man who wrote the oldest list of 7 wonders that we have, put this still at the top of his list. He was filled with wonder. He said, by works like this, men either rise to gods or the gods come down to earth.
To later ages, such magical geometry, such extraordinary accuracy was supernatural. Medieval Arab writers said that the pyramids had been built to measure time. Time itself, they wrote, is frightened of the pyramids. Eminent European mathematicians and astronomers searched for links between the Great Pyramid and the universal order. Such theories were often based on the internal chambers of the Great Pyramid, whose corridors and chambers were made with deadly accuracy. There were 3 burial chambers. The first was cut into the rock under the centre of the pyramid in the traditional way. Later on, a second corridor was cut and a second burial chamber built at its end. But this too was never finished, and once again another corridor, the huge, unique Grand Gallery, a wonder in itself, was extended into the high heart of the pyramid, and a third burial chamber set at its ending. To many Westerners of the past 100 years or so, such fearful symmetries betrayed the hand of God, just as did the Holy Bible. If this was so, the measurements of these ancient stones held the history of the future in them, just as did the book of Revelations. Counting out the years from the Bible story of creation, they measured out the corridors, through the ages of Adam and the patriarchs, through the prophets and the kings, the life of Jesus, and up to the doorway of the highest burial chamber, which, they claimed, marked the year 1914, the same year that, according to these Westerners of the 1920s, had seen the beginning of the greatest calamity the world had ever known. Suddenly then, the future lay in here, in King Cheop's great burial chamber.
Can you imagine them then, these modern mystics? The secrets of history, the future and their ruler. They slowly approach the ending of the world. 1928. Clearly crazy, it doesn't work. But in some strange way, these people had hit on something of the ancient mentality, something of that grasping for eternity. These air shafts go straight up to major stars, right to the outside of the pyramid. This building is locked into heaven. The floor, if you extend it out from here, 180 feet, the pyramid above is exactly half the size of the Great Pyramid in its entirety. There's a magical geometry going on here. These walls are so accurately constructed north, south, east and west that they're hundredths of a degree out. This sarcophagus, before the tourists got at it, was so perfect that only the most modern measuring instruments can find out discrepancies in its size. So the ancients too were interested in a sort of eternal perfection. The king had been placed in the heart of Egypt, in the heart of heaven. The Nile, after all, flows from south to north. The sun crosses it from east to west. They were grasping for eternity. They made this room as hard as a diamond and as perfect as they could, so the king and Egypt would last for all eternity.
After the Egyptians came the Greeks and Romans, who said that geometry itself had come from Egypt and made a list of 7 wonders. Then came the Christians, who shunned such pagan things. Not even the pyramids are mentioned in the Bible. To them, all real wonders were the works of God. For a while, the 7 ancient wonders seemed to disappear. But these astonishing stones in the desert endured, and pilgrims still walk through the sand to see them. So memories of the ancient wonders flickered in the West's imagination. And then the ancient lists were rediscovered, printed, published, read again, and far away in Christian Rome, the ghosts of wonder rose. So a giant statue of an emperor that had stood here beside Rome's largest amphitheatre was identified as the Colossus that had stood upon the Isle of Rhodes. And the Colosseum took its name from one of the 7 wonders of the world. Slowly, the city filled with ancient wonders. The tombs of the ancient emperors of Rome seemed like hanging gardens, and there were obelisks and pyramids, no one knew the difference now, and temples too, and giant statues. Now Rome, not Babylon, was filled with stars and zodiacs. It became a magic city, surrounded with a wall of iron enclosing 7 hills, one for each day of the creation, and one for the Creator's rest. And there were 365 squares in Rome, 365 streets, 365 palaces for the popes, and each palace had 365 steps, and each step was covered with bread enough to feed the world. It was a dream of poor people, imagining a legendary past, a past of endless wealth and wonder. Slowly, though, the ancient ghosts of wonder found a place again in humankind's imagination and ambition. And then it was that the finest images of all the 7 wonders were created. at that magic moment when scientific study had begun, yet all those ancient memories and myths were still alive. About 1520, a Dutch artist, Martin van Heemskerk, travelled down to Rome and was completely fascinated. Years later, he produced a set of drawings of the Seven Wonders that brought them back to life again. Heemskerk set his Seven Wonders on a stage which everybody knew and could enjoy. They were published as a set of prints and were very popular. And still a century later, tapestry weavers were using his designs in sets of noble hangings that portrayed the 7 ancient wonders of the world. That's perhaps the most famous of Heemskerk's 7 wonders, the great Colossus of Rhodes astride the harbour. Actually, it wasn't Heemskerk's idea, that figure. It never really stood like that, of course. What happened was that a traveller went to Rhodes, heard a local story, put a drawing of it in a geography book. And Heemskerk pinched the drawing, which was just of this figure, but he set it in this wonderful, magical landscape, and he's telling the story of the Colossus. See, what's going on? There's an Arab raid. See those little boats going in, all the Christian galley slaves pulling away? There's the local people praying to the Colossus for help. And here's the Arab workman demolishing the great face of the statue. So he's really bringing the 7 wonders alive, you might say. This one, well, this brings it alive in a different sort of way. It tells another story. Not the destruction of one of the wonders, but actually its building. You see, there's the great temple of Artemis at Ephesus. There's the goddess suitably clothed in northern style. And there's the master masons all chipping away and making the columns. Now, this is where this one gets a bit interesting, because this column here actually fits beside the doorway. And this guy here is said by some to be King Solomon, and this is the building of Solomon's temple. See, what happened in medieval times was that the 7 wonders were pagan, were taken over by another set of wonders. So the pyramid becomes Noah's Ark. The temple of Artemis becomes the temple of Solomon. Look, there's something else very interesting in this tapestry here. These poor workers that made these things in Brussels really had to follow these grand designs, but in the borders, they were allowed to do their own thing. And these guys in their little dark workshops were thinking about the 7 wonders of the world, not the grand vision, but the little common ordinary visions. And so you get up there another of the Gothic 7 wonders, the magic bird, the phoenix, that builds its funeral pyre and is lit by the sun, and as it burns to death, it rises in resurrection. It's an image of Jesus Christ. And there's another very local wonder here too, and that's a little hot spring by the French town of Grenoble. Very wonderful to have warm water without having to heat it. Now, Heemskerk just didn't do 7 wonders, he did 8. And the 8th was his beloved Colosseum in Rome, the only one of the wonders he actually would have seen. There it is, and look what's standing in the middle. In the Middle Ages, it was thought that the Colossus of Rhodes had actually been taken to Rome and stood in the middle of the Colosseum, which was a great temple of the sun. So there's the statue, standing now in the middle of a wonderful Gothic landscape with millions of people enjoying the games. You see, what Heemskerk did, he brought the 7 wonders alive and he put them back onto the stage of history. There were other visions of the 7 wonders, visions less benign and far more frightening. And these too haunt our modern cities. Dreams that started in a Roman wood. Dreams of pain and love and death. This weird building is a sort of Renaissance time lock, the entrance to a dream of the 7 wonders of the world. The entrance, too, to a garden made in the 16th century by Vicino Orsini, a retired soldier, a clever, cynical man amusing his friends. Here, the seven wonders have become a set of riddles in a sacred grove. A little wood filled with footnotes, paradox, and sheer terror. Orsini turns the Colossus of the Seven Wonders into a wrestling madman, tearing his opponent right in half. The old soldier who conducted massacres on behalf of the Pope shows us the darker side of valour and presents us with a tortured paradox. Orsini himself nudges you as you walk around his nightmare. If Rhodes took pride from its Colossus, he says, so this one in my wood is glorious too. An old Venetian woodcut in a dream book showed Orsini this vision of the ancient mausoleum. His sculptors copied the wind vane, trumpeting victory at the top, and stood it on a tortoise. It's a slow, cynical victory, this then, one moving into the jaws of hell.
And on the very mouth of hell itself, Orsini wrote Dante's famous words, "Abandon all thought, ye who enter here."
Another of these woodcuts showed a monk's erotic dream. Two lovers looking at the ruins of an ancient city in a forest. Orsini too made a brand new ruin for us in his wood. A ruined tomb cut from a single rock. These, then, are the very first examples of Westerners taking pleasure in ruins. A pleasure now that drives a worldwide media industry and a multi-billion-dollar tourist trade as well. Here at last is hope. The light of the world, the Pharos of Alexandria, one of the seven wonders drawn for Orsini by a friend. But the world is barely balanced on a monster's head, and it's surrounded by a grove of four-faced gods. It's a very modern dream, then. A dream that takes the seven wonders and uses them to make a grand new statement. A little later on, this same device will place the ghosts of wonder into almost every modern city in the world. One man alone, the man who made the drawing of Orsini's lighthouse for him, the artist antiquarian Piero Ligurio, had started the seven wonders on their journey from this lonely wood. There you are, volume 34 of the Antiquities of Rome by Piero Ligurio. There were once hundreds of these. There's only a few of them left now. This one's kept in Piero's hometown of Naples. Piero is not much known today. In fact, he's best known for mucking around with Michelangelo's designs and getting a sack. He really didn't like Michelangelo. Michelangelo wasn't a scholar. Piero Ligurio was, and he was a new and different sort of scholar. Older people really had just looked at the books and conjured up the past from that. They'd ended up with a past which was full of dragons and alchemists as well as wise men, but a very distant thing. But Piero saw the past as a great machine that had sort of distracted and strewn its bits across the landscape, and he studied the bits and put them together with the ancient texts. So here's a book then that describes all the monuments of Rome, written by hand. These were never printed, that's why they're so precious. Most of these monuments have gone today. Look, here's a section on the king of the gods. Altar, coin, drainpipe, statues. Slowly, Piero's putting together that ancient world, putting it back with the texts. See, earlier on, in Bomarzo, the ancient world had been sort of a place of fairies and dragons and alchemists. But here, Piero's really starting to get down to it. He sees the past's world as a machine. And in this machine, the Seven Wonders plays a very special role. Just look what he has to say about some of his gods. Here's the goddess Artemis, for example, whose greatest temple was at Ephesus, as Pyrrho well knew. Pyrrho knew almost as much about Artemis as we do today. This is his beautiful drawing of her. He saw her really as the mother of the universe, a bit like the Virgin Mary, really. He saw her, as he saw that ancient universe, as an age in which all of humankind was symbolised and portrayed in the most amazing way. It opened up the past as it had never been done before. The climax of Pyrrho's work on antiquity is this extraordinary map which he had printed in 1561. It shows the city of Rome. For most Westerners, it was always thought of as really the climax of pagan civilization. For Pyrrho, of course, that meant it had to be filled with wonder, each one of these wonders somehow symbolising the necessary bits of the great machine. So if we look across his map, it's not only a wonderful map of Rome, but it is filled with the wonders of the world. There, for example, was hanging gardens. To Pyrrho, this meant the beautiful balance of man and nature. There's some pyramids. They were not only granaries, like the Bible said, but held the wealth of the human soul. Lighthouses, too, to guide people through the streets and down the rivers. But you know, it wasn't just the map of Rome that really Pyrrho achieved this wonderful fusion of myth and archaeology. He did another map of the port of Rome that ran off the side. There, it's all put together. So many of the wonders. There's a colossus standing to tell you that you are coming to the centre of civilization. There's a lighthouse too to guide your boat into the harbour and your soul towards civilization too. And there's a great arcade embracing not only sailors but the soul itself.
Pyrrho Ligurio actually got to build a model of his Rome and all its wonders too, here in the magical gardens of Cardinal d'Este at Tivoli outside Rome. Sad to say, there's not much left of Pyrrho's Rome today. Enough, though, to see something of a dream. For 400 years, Tivoli has been one of the West's most influential gardens. From here, the ghosts of wonder have seeped into the West. When it was new, before the great trees grew up, Pyrrho's design was overwhelming. It began with the biblical deluge, a single massive waterfall running down the hill greater even than Babylon's great hanging gardens. Pyrrho's garden, in fact, is nothing more or less than a huge model of the universe, a cosmos with echoes of the ancient wonders. Pyrrho's model Rome stood for civilization. Neptune's fountain symbolized the sea. Another was designed as Artemis' temple at Ephesus, one of the ancient wonders of the world. Hidden away now and far from her temple, Pyrrho resurrected Artemis to stand as Mother Nature, feeding all creation, the great goddess of the garden. Was all of this an inspiration for the squares of Rome, or was Pyrrho simply ahead of his time? At St. Peter's, Bernini's great arcade seemed to echo Pyrrho's famous drawing of the ancient port of Rome.
And all those wonders are still here too, now exorcised by Christian popes. The Egyptian obelisk, which Pyrrho called a pyramid, is crowned now with a golden cross. And Pyrrho's pagan port is now a haven for the faithful, ringed by colossal statues of the saints. And the Pharos lighthouse? Well, that's St. Peter's. The lantern on the church, sending out the light of faith into the darkness of the world. Street by street, square by square, all Rome was filling with dreams of wonder. A theatre full of brand new wonders, echoing the ancient ghosts. Haunting visions of antiquity, of Alexander, elephants and Pharos. Of pyramids and mausoleums, of magic kings and queens and vast vaulting temples. Huge ambitions and astounding images spilling out across the Western world. The ancient ghosts of wonder. It was an Austrian architect that finally brought the Seven Wonders down to earth. Johann Fischer von Erlach took time off from redesigning Vienna to produce really the first work of art history in the world. And the Seven Wonders are right at the front. It's the title page, magnificent black letter script. And here, immediately, are the Seven Wonders. This is the Seven Wonders as process. This is not the Seven Wonders as marvels and miracles. Here we've got a picture of Babylonia, and he's working out how the gardens are irrigated. He also points out that this is the biggest brick building ever made. Very important. Same at the pyramids. He points out this is the biggest stone building ever made. How did people do that? We're into logistics. So when we get to Zeus, this is not only the biggest ivory statue ever made, but he's also worrying about how you accommodate it in a temple. You know, you're really looking at the beginning of the modern world. The mausoleum, great temples, Artemis. He describes it as the perfect mixture of marble and stone. You see, he's very involved in numbers. Not entirely involved in numbers. He's still got the wonderful old Colossus of Rhodes striding across the harbour wall. This is still the age when Louis XV's courtiers were killing children in black masses, after all. But nonetheless, this is a modern man thinking about the modern wonders. Here's the lighthouse. The description underneath tells you how it was made. In the 18th century, though, the same century as von Erlach, wonder itself was slowly transforming, changing to span the world. A brand new sense of wonder was starting to emerge.
On Sunday, the 12th of August, in the year of our Lord, 1770, two rather anxious men puffed their way up this hill. Captain James Cook of the Royal Navy and the botanist Joseph Banks. This is the hill of Lizard Island. Cook was exploring the entire east coast of Australia. Now, of course, he wasn't the first man to come here. The Aborigines had been here so long, they'd seen the sea come into the land and the corals grow in the warm water. There'd been Javanese here too, and Chinese. But Cook's party were the first people with a real modern vision to come here. People with a modern sense of property and ownership. And they were prepared to back that with guns. At that time, men like Cook were mapping the entire world, marking out, taking control. In the century that followed, railways, airstrips, roads, cables of a dozen descriptions went right around the planet, encompassing the whole world in a net. And that grand, uncontrolled, unexplored nature, the world in which man had lived since the beginning of time, the world in which he'd built the 7 wonders, would all but disappear. As they climbed, though, in burning heat and very high humidity, they weren't thinking of all that. They were actually looking for a way out of a most deadly trap.
The trap was made of living coral. As Captain Cook sailed north up the Australian coast, the solid wall of the Great Barrier Reef had pushed him ever closer to the shore. For 1,000 miles and more, Cook successfully avoided it, inching behind small boats sent out to spot underwater hazards. On June the 11th, though, the Endeavour hit a reef and stuck fast. As the waves rocked her back and forth, the sharp corals soared through the Endeavour's hull. The sailors saw some of the planks of the keel floating to the surface. They threw everything they could lay their hands on overboard and managed to refloat her. After a desperate week of gales, they found a crocodile-infested inlet where they beached the Endeavour and started to repair her. Five weeks later, they were back at sea, still inching through the world's most dangerous stretch of water, still threatened by the coral, and finding the reef moving ever closer to the land, feeling, as Cook says, entirely trapped on this most alien shore. They had climbed the hill of Lizard Island, the highest on the reef, to look for a way out of the coral barrier into the open sea. From the top of the hill, Cook saw a way out, a narrow passage through the reef, and took the necessary compass bearing. The very next day, the Endeavour sailed triumphantly through the perilous little channel, through the Great Barrier and out into the high, wide sea. These days, Cook's labyrinthine trap is counted as one of the wonders of the world. The Great Barrier Reef, as large as the state of California, the world's largest living organism, and the only one that you can see from space. What Cook saw as a terrifying hazard is something most modern people want to see before they die. Dive here and it's incredible. 400 different corals, 1,500 species of fish, 400 mollusks and wonderful animals like whales and turtles. Fly over it and it looks like a chain of opals lying in the sea. But only a microscope can show you the details of the coral polyps that made it all. To see the wonder of this place, to see it in the way we see today, you need the sort of equipment that Captain Cook never knew. Aqualungs, cameras, aeroplanes, space capsules and microscopes. All this has made a very different world for us. Though Cook would never know it, his maps and plans of unknown seashores have become part of a basic grid of this brand new universe, where there are wonders of a very different type, wonders of nature manipulated and observed. Spanning a canyon on the Colorado River, the Boulder Dam is the world's largest concrete structure and costs pyramids of cash. Its waters irrigate California. Its turbines light Las Vegas, and nature is manipulated on a scale not seen before. Now, the great grand natural world is trapped and newly linked to humankind. Building from powerful basic forces using natural laws, we make electricity and all the other modern energies. In a way, then, we add to nature, and we have made a brand new world with very modern wonders. Like most modern buildings, the Las Vegas Pyramid and Sphinx are only temporary. They have built-in obsolescence. Ancient wonders, though, were built forever and for courtiers and kings. This, though, is the democratization of wonder. People play in modern pyramids. They are cooled and warmed and entertained by them. Here, though, the world's largest beam of light, which I'm told you can clearly see from space, may be turned off in 10 years' time. Clearly, the real wonder's somewhere else. Now, perhaps, the cities with their wiry nerves have themselves become a wonder. They're not the kind of thing traditionally called wonderful. Yet they are wonderful as a landscape, and like a landscape, they are shaped continuously by natural force. Ancient people also thought that they were linked with nature, that the prisms of the pyramids refracted the divine order of the universe onto the ancient state of Egypt. Our true beginnings, then, where wonder and the modern mind were made, are here at Pharaoh's magic mountains.